Hey everyone, welcome back to the Podcast Life. I'm Deanna Chapman, and today we're talking about 3 big things to do before you launch your podcast. And I wanted to talk about this because I was someone who launched podcasts without any real plan at the start. I had been asked to start a music podcast. I had listened to a ton of podcasts, but I didn't know anything about making them. I just knew that I had majored in music industry and was familiar enough with digital audio workstations, and I just kind of taught myself how to do all of this. And then once I started getting into actually getting paid to work on other people's podcasts, that's when a lot of things changed. So the first step that I would suggest everyone who is looking to start a podcast starts with is to define your idea and format. So for this show, for instance, I knew from the start that I wanted to do interview episodes with people in the podcast industry, but I also knew that I wanted to do episodes like this, a solo episode. So I decided that alternating would be the best format for both my schedule and just for the podcast in general. So there's consistency. You know, you're getting an interview and then a solo episode and so on and so forth. And you also just need to know what structure works best for your show. If you're doing something like a movie review podcast, that is a show that works best with a co-host probably. Making sure that your show has the right format that works for both you and anyone you may be doing the podcast with, and for your topic as well, will just really help you have a clear direction for your show. I knew exactly what I wanted the interview episodes and the solo episodes to be for this, so it made things a lot easier. So for anyone who is just now joining me, the solo episodes are just sort of lessons I've learned throughout my years as a person who has done plenty of hobby podcasts and someone who has been paid as a freelance editor to work on larger podcasts. And then the second thing I would say is a must-do before you launch your podcast is record 3 to 5 test episodes. You can absolutely release these episodes, but it's good to just have at least 3 to 5 under your belt so you have a feel for the show, especially if you're doing something, like I said, with a co-host. You want to make sure that you two mesh before you just start putting out episodes, and it allows you to refine your content. So if you want those episodes to never see the light of day, that is totally fine. No one has to know they exist. You just have to do them to sort of help yourself get in the swing of things. And if they turn out to be episodes that you really like and you think the content works for what your podcast is, then by all means, release those as your first few episodes. It also just helps you build up some confidence. I am someone who is not comfortable in front of a camera, and it was kind of wild to me that I did finally find a way to be comfortable in front of a microphone. And a lot of people who knew me before I started a podcast would probably tell you the same thing. And it's just really about finding your footing and making sure you know what everything is as far as the process and what your topics are. If you have segments, if those work, do you need to rearrange some things? These test episodes are just really, really key for helping you get your gears going and make sure you make the show what you want it to be. And the third thing, which is also very, very important, is to create a podcast trailer. And I can guarantee you I will be doing a full episode, hopefully an interview episode, just on podcast trailers in the near future. And I really, really think this is great for a couple different reasons. For anyone who is starting a podcast for the first time, there's a lot of stuff on the back end through your distribution host that needs to be set up before you can release your first episode. And you cannot submit to platforms like Apple until you have an episode in your RSS feed. So the trailer is a perfect way to just get your feed ready for your first big episode, and possibly more importantly, it also gives the listeners an idea of what to expect from the show. Because if you just drop an episode that's somewhere from 30 to 60 minutes long, for instance, that is a lot harder to get someone to commit to without really knowing what the show is about. Sure, you have your podcast description, and that will tell people, generally speaking, what the topic of the podcast is and what to expect. But there's something about just hearing someone tell you what it is about that just really helps. And then people can subscribe to the feed before the first episode drops. So then it's just ready to go on their podcast players on launch day. And it is just a smoother experience, especially for listeners. So basically, think of your podcast trailer as a movie trailer. How many times have you seen a movie based on the trailer, but maybe that wasn't on your radar before? And obviously, with algorithms and things being the way they are with podcast discovery, people aren't going to necessarily consume these trailers in the same way, but it really is just like a little taste of what's to come with your podcast. And I think it is really, really important to have one of those. So those are 3 big things that you should do before launching your podcast. I am sure, again, that I will go into much more detail on those things individually. And if you want to know anything else about podcasting or what it's like to be a freelance podcast editor, drop a comment below and I will either reply or possibly make a future episode about that topic. So that is all I have for you today. If you want more on podcast pre-production, be sure to check out my episode with Jesse Cannon.